Most people never notice when their life starts falling apart because the damage usually compounds quietly over time. A few small debts, a little stress, and repeated bad habits can slowly create a long-term financial drawdown. At first, the problems feel manageable until the accumulated pressure suddenly exceeds your emotional time horizon. People are usually taught that compounding only works for investing and long-term wealth growth. But compounding also works on debt, anxiety, and repeated emotional spending patterns. The biggest risks in adulthood often come from tiny repeated decisions instead of dramatic financial mistakes. Modern life makes these patterns feel normal because the system hides volatility behind convenience. Small purchases and stress spending slowly stop feeling optional and start becoming permanent routines. This video explores how compounding shapes both financial growth and long-term emotional pressure. The real problem for many adults is not income alone, but the silent accumulation draining energy every single day. The internet loves to present compounding like financial magic, where tiny investments quietly become massive wealth over time. Mathematically, the idea is true because time naturally amplifies whatever keeps repeating consistently. But people rarely talk about the other side of compounding because problems also grow quietly with time. Credit card debt does not feel dangerous at first because the real pressure arrives from interest that never stops growing. Lifestyle inflation works the same way because every small upgrade feels harmless when viewed individually. More food delivery subscriptions and small monthly payments slowly pile up until they become part of everyday life. Then one day, the same salary that once felt comfortable suddenly disappears before the month even ends. That is modern compounding, where tiny repeated habits slowly become heavy long-term financial pressure. Human psychology is terrible at noticing slow accumulation because short-term comfort always feels more urgent. Many financial decisions look safe today, even though the long-term drawdown only appears years later. Modern consumer systems depend heavily on habits that encourage people to consume first and think later. Pay later financing and tiny installments make expensive decisions feel emotionally lighter in the moment. The system understands that repeated small habits eventually become enormous long-term business revenue. And without noticing it, many people slowly discover that compounding has quietly started working against them. Compound interest does not only shape money because human psychology compounds in the same quiet way over time. A small amount of daily stress feels manageable until the body quietly adapts to permanent exhaustion. A little overtime seems normal at first until life slowly turns into a routine without direction or recovery. Modern adulthood is filled with small accumulations that rarely look dangerous when they first appear. That is why burnout usually arrives quietly instead of appearing like one dramatic collapse. Financial anxiety also compounds gradually instead of appearing all at once. Most financial pressure begins with small, unresolved problems like bills, deadlines, and rising living costs. Eventually, the brain starts operating in permanent survival mode even during ordinary moments. At that point, long-term thinking becomes difficult because mental energy gets consumed before planning can even begin. Ironically, the internet still tells exhausted people to simply become more disciplined. Discipline matters, but human psychology still has limits that productivity culture rarely acknowledges. When small pressures keep compounding, even intelligent people can start making short-term decisions. Many people feel stuck because their lives were worn down gradually instead of collapsing all at once. Sometimes people are not destroyed instantly because small unresolved pressures slowly compound for years. A young office worker in Chicago started using his credit card for small self-rewards after long workdays. Expensive coffee and small online purchases slowly became part of his routine during stressful weeks. Nothing felt reckless because every transaction looked small and manageable in the moment. A year later, the balance never fully returned to zero even after each paycheck arrived. Interest kept growing quietly while minimum payments created the illusion that everything was under control. One day, he realized part of every salary was only paying for decisions made months earlier. Negative compounding works slowly enough that people often notice it only after the pressure becomes constant. Modern finance systems are designed to make short-term comfort feel smooth and frictionless at first. Almost nobody ruins their finances with one transaction because the real danger is repetition over time. Small spending patterns usually appear when people are exhausted, stressed, or emotionally overloaded. Many financial decisions are actually emotional coping mechanisms disguised as normal consumer behavior. People do not always buy things because they need them, but because they need temporary relief. Once emotional relief becomes a habit, negative compounding starts building pressure in the background. Instead of building long-term freedom, the cycle slowly creates another layer of financial pressure. The interesting part is that compounding also works quietly in favor of small positive habits over a long time horizon. One office worker on a finance podcast admitted he started investing with amounts that barely felt meaningful. It was not thousands of dollars, just a small automatic contribution every single month. For years, his life still looked ordinary, with no dramatic change and no overnight success story. He did not suddenly become rich or post screenshots of portfolio gains on the internet, but he developed something many people struggle to maintain, which was calm, long-term consistency. Over time, the money slowly grew, but his daily behavior changed even more than the numbers did. He started thinking further ahead with more patience and more awareness around spending risk. This is what people often miss about positive compounding because the money is only part of the story. A person's identity also shifts slowly when small financial habits are repeated for years. Small routines quietly shape the direction of a life even when results stay invisible for a while. Many people quit because they focus too heavily on fast, visible results instead of sustainable progress. Real life works more like a plant because slow growth usually depends on invisible roots first. The strongest compounding often happens quietly while nobody else notices the change happening in real time. Modern life rarely collapses from one giant crisis because most pressure arrives in tiny daily installments. Late-night work notifications and slightly higher grocery prices slowly reduce financial breathing room over time. Monthly subscriptions feel harmless individually but heavy once every payment compounds together. Compounding does not always look dramatic because small pressures often become overwhelming very slowly. Many young couples no longer feel poor but still never feel financially secure. That emotional gray zone has quietly become a normal part of modern financial life. Paying every bill on time does not always mean someone has enough margin to breathe. Without mental space, even simple long-term decisions can start to feel emotionally expensive. Most people already understand basic financial habits, but consistency becomes difficult under constant pressure. Sometimes financial exhaustion is less about knowledge and more about endless small interruptions. Modern economies are extremely effective at turning small dependencies into long-term profit systems. That is why modern life often feels permanently close to stability but never fully relaxed. When people live under constant pressure for too long, their long-term thinking capacity slowly shrinks. Compound interest is not always about wealth growing because sometimes it describes how life gradually becomes heavier. Maybe the best way to understand compounding is not through stocks first, but through ordinary daily life. Small actions repeated for years eventually become the structure of our lives. A little exercise, enough sleep, and slightly better impulse control rarely feel dramatic in the moment. At first, those decisions seem insignificant, but time quietly amplifies everything. That is the quiet side of compounding because it rarely arrives with dramatic moments or volatility. Realistic life changes usually look boring because long-term progress moves slowly. The internet prefers instant results, but most human lives change through gradual compounding instead. And maybe that is actually good news because life can also improve one small step at a time. Most sustainable change does not happen overnight, but through small decisions that survive long time horizons. Compounding rewards consistency more than intensity, and that applies to almost every part of life. Financial stability, physical health, strong relationships, and even mental calmness all follow similar patterns. The problem is that people often underestimate small progress because the results stay invisible for a while. Life rarely changes from one huge moment because most outcomes come from repeated patterns over time. And maybe our future is already being built right now by habits that still feel too small to matter today. Compound interest is not just an investing concept because it quietly shapes how modern life compounds over time. Small habits repeated across a long time horizon eventually become either freedom or emotional drawdown. Modern systems constantly reward fast comfort because short-term convenience is usually more profitable than long-term stability. Understanding compounding matters because most financial risk grows gradually before people even notice it. Sometimes life deteriorates slowly through accumulated stress, and sometimes recovery happens through equally small improvements. Most people cannot fix everything immediately, but even a small shift in direction can change long-term outcomes. The margin explores the emotional volatility and hidden math behind money work and modern living systems. The goal is not fake hustle culture, but a calmer understanding of how compounding actually affects everyday people. If this feels relatable, then maybe a small hidden pattern in your own life is becoming visible now. What negative compounding pattern do you think damages modern life the most today? The goal is not perfection, but creating enough intention so life stops running entirely on autopilot. Small decisions repeated today often become invisible systems tomorrow, and those systems quietly shape long-term outcomes. Slow progress can feel emotionally frustrating, but a long-term time horizon changes how meaningful growth actually looks. In a culture obsessed with speed, the most durable kind of progress is often the quiet version nobody notices immediately. Compound interest is not just an investing concept because it quietly shapes how modern life compounds over time. Small habits repeated across a long time horizon eventually become either freedom or emotional drawdown. Modern systems constantly reward fast comfort because short-term convenience is usually more profitable than long-term stability. Understanding compounding matters because most financial risk grows gradually before people even notice it. Sometimes life deteriorates slowly through accumulated stress, and sometimes recovery happens through equally small improvements. Most people cannot fix everything immediately, but even a small shift in direction can change long-term outcomes. The margin explores the emotional volatility and hidden math behind money work and modern living systems. The goal is not fake hustle culture, but a calmer understanding of how compounding actually affects everyday people. If this feels relatable, then maybe a small hidden pattern in your own life is becoming visible now? What negative compounding pattern do you think damages modern life the most today?